Hey guys, thanks for tuning into the podcast. We sure love doing these for you. We're still new at this, so bear with us, but we'll try to get the best audio quality and content for you to enjoy. This particular topic is on consciousness, which is my favorite topic. It's the biggest topic to talk about. Everything in the world has a spiritual nature to it, and looking at through the lens of consciousness is a way we can understand it. So we have a nice little discussion about what is consciousness, how is it useful to understand it, and in subsequent episodes we'll refer back to consciousness quite a bit because that's just an easy way to sort of make something that is spiritual and nonlinear understandable to the mind. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Any feedback you have, comments, questions, cool things you're learning yourself, let us know. We'd love to talk about them. In any event, God bless. I hope you enjoy. Okay, probably the biggest topic of our podcast, the most important topic, and I don't even know how to start talking about it.
It's a big one. Consciousness.
Yeah, I mean that's the word even that's used, but
no,
that's used in a lot of ways that not everyone even has an agreement on what it is. You hear Elon Musk talking about expanding human consciousness into a multiplanetary species, and I'll listen to some other podcast, and even that word doesn't seem to necessarily have any sort of universal agreement on what it means.
I agree. I feel like science hasn't even been able to come up with a theory to what consciousness is, meaning they haven't been able to get enough material to even figure that out. I don't know. Let's get in there and play. I don't think either one of us are saying we're experts on it, just trying to figure it out. And like right away when you say consciousness, to me, I go right in energetically, and to me, consciousness is the awareness state, right? Yeah. But you could be not conscious, right? But then we get into like, so let's talk about that. Like if we have a body or somebody who's in a non-conscious state, say they're in the hospital, but they're still alive, right?
Right, there's that conscious.
So then like, right. Okay, so they're still there. And then what's also like fascinating is when they talk about near-death experiences where the person wasn't conscious or awake, but they can retell, or not even near death, but like where there's experiences where people weren't conscious, but then can retell what was going on in the room when they weren't conscious, right? So like, right. What is going on there? Another way I would try to articulate like consciousness is fields of awareness, I would say. When I get into consciousnness energetically speaking, I can't form it. It's moving. It's like so for instance, the soul, when I tap into the soul, I can't figure out where it starts or necessarily ends. It holds this information kind of like light. Like if I was like, Richard, find the end of where the light ends in this room. Could you find it?
Yeah, no.
And so what I would say is like the soul to me when I'm tapping in is like, it's I can't form it. And consciousness is, when I'm tapping into consciousness, is like similar to the soul in the sense of like, I can't conform. It's not like solid. It's always moving, but there's like consciousness when I feel it energetically, or streams of consciousness, right? So like I can get into a conscious, like meditative state. So in that, I have an awareness that's deeper than my day-to-day conscious state, right? Then we can alter our states, whatever it is. Pick any drug you could. Heck, even Benadryl alters my state, right? Like, but you could do psychedelics. So then it's putting this new viewpoint on things. Also, another way, like when we're talking about consciousness, I would say, like, let's get into trees, for instance, okay? So, like, in my backyard, I have pine trees and I have aspen trees. The pine trees seem to have, like, a consciousness of the pine trees. And the aspens have, like, a consciousness of, like, the aspen trees. But each of them also are individual. Like, so, like, I can sense each tree kind of has a personality, but it doesn't express, it's, like, all energy, right? Right. So, like, the thing is, the aspen trees have like a conscious energy of the aspen tree, and the pines have a conscious energy of the pines. However, then I can group them all into tree consciousness. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I would say working with individuals or human souls, everybody is at different conscious states. So like when I have a certain individual comes in right away with my abilities, I can see where they like, are they consciously aware? Where is their awareness? So maybe that's where consciousness is, but there's so many different states of consciousness. Like I have a conscious field within my own being, but then there's the collective consciousness, right? Like, so then I could get into different groups of like, well, I have like you and I right now are in the spiritual conscious field, right? We're coming from that awareness of the consciousness of spirituality, right? But that doesn't mean everybody's coming from that.
Right. The way I would explain it or start to explain it, well, first I would say go read the best author on this, in my opinion, David Hawkins. His work is the greatest, and I want to show some of his charts to maybe help introduce this. And again, this podcast isn't designed to be the experts and say we know all about it, but just to talk about it, because if you start looking at life through this lens, I feel like it helps you understand reality through what I would say consciousness is, which is the spiritual essence of everything. Like everything that's living has an essence to it, a spiritual level of awareness. The trees have a certain level of awareness. Mm-hmm. The deer, think of anything. There's actually, thanks to some work like Hawkins, someone that's actually assigned arbitrary numbers to it. You can't actually define divinity. There's no way you can say like something measures at like a certain amount because God is infinite. So when you pick something like his body of work that he did, you're really just trying to say like this arbitrary scale, this range of energy that's experienced on Earth, where anything from like a serial killer to Mother Teresa, there's variability. There's a difference between the way Mother Teresa sees the world and the way like Ted Bundy sees the world.
Totally. Which is a good way, like in another way. So maybe consciousness, a way to like articulate that is like the lens of that it's being viewed from. So like you and I are going to go see, which I'm so excited, Sean O'Leary, which his whole retreat is on Christ consciousness, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I do like every day before I set out, like in the day when I'm getting aligned and going to be working with clients and stuff, I start a practice right away where I'm like, utilize me today. Let me see what I need to see. Let me know what I need to know. Let me hear all the things physically and on the multi-sensory level. But the thing I always end with is impress the mind of Christ on me. Impress the Christ consciousness on me is what I'm asking for, because what I'm seeking as I'm working is to have the help of like, the egoic mind is going to come in and shift into duality, right? And so I'm asking to come in from the eyes, basically, of Christ-like, right? And so that's a conscious field. So when we talk about like Christ consciousness, like we can put some characteristics in there. So I would also say like the conscious fields themselves have identities to them, but they don't identify themselves to it. So like Christ consciousness is a non-judgmental state, right? It's coming from loving awareness where it's an all accepting viewpoint. So that is totally different from somebody coming from a lower conscious field of density, because a lot of times the viewpoint that they're coming from is tied to the egoic operating system, which is telling me I'm less that, or I'm missing out on something. So it comes from more of a place of scarcity, the viewpoint, instead of abundance, right? And that's a shift in conscious fields.
Yeah, right. Well, let's look at just to give, especially the male brain that needs more like that kind of logical framing around something that's spiritual in nature. That's the challenge with energy and spiritual things. You're talking about awareness, and these are subjective elements, but the consciousness chart, for those that are familiar with it, they've probably seen it. I've seen Sales Bros, I've seen different people putting this chart in places, but basically using kinesiology. There's a doc, Hawkins used muscle testing to calibrate the essence of things, and everything below the courage level, pride down to shame, these were all the animal, negative, fearful what he calls force in his book, Power versus Force. And then there's the courage and above, which is the love and power side of consciousness. Christ consciousness being actually 1,000. It's not on here, but where there is zero animal instinct or influence. It's that pure love. And so the range of consciousness as it exists in the world that's the range that we all get to experience. I want to pull this one up, what this actually means. I don't know if you can see this, Shannon. But if someone comes into your office, a client, and let's say, and by the way, we all have these different emotions. It doesn't mean that's where we are personally. And one of the ego traps for people that hear about this concept is that they want to know what they calibrate at, or they might go pay some person like $1,000 to raise their vibration or to measure their level of consciousness, and it's an absolute trap. Do not do it. Anyone that's listening, like turn away.
U-turn.
Just take a U-turn. Don't freaking pay someone money to try and calibrate your level or change your vibration. It's freaking nonsense.
You can actually just attune within, which is what I'm trying to teach people.
Yes.
It's different states of consciousness. Like even when you're just talking, like I was saying, like there's the egoic operating system, right? Which is a very dense dualistic operating system. One thing that like I recommend to a lot of my clients when they're having a hard time or feeling overwhelmed by things, or not even what I recommend. How many people like to go into nature, right? Like just to be able to just let go, right? Because in that conscious stream of nature, there is no divide. There is no egoic operating system in that conscious field. So it's like a way to view things as just as is. Like trees aren't like when I'm talking about my pine tree and my aspen tree, the aspen tree isn't like, look at that pine tree over there. Look at that fat son of a bitch. You know what I mean? And the pine tree is not judging. They're just being trees, which is again, conscious levels are state of beingness, and to your point, essence, right? There's this essence. So we can't necessarily capture that unless you get into these different conscious states of intuitive, like understanding energy fields. But again, they're subjective to a certain point. But when I have certain people coming in and they're in a better conscious state, they can feel it. They know it. And so to your point, you don't necessarily need to go and ask for somebody to figure it out. You can sense what conscious state you're in.
For sure you can. And one of the ways you can know what conscious state you're in, generally speaking, if you would really want to know where you are at personally, you can look at the qualities in the way you view the world, the way you act in the world. And there's a lot of good books on it. But like for an example here, if you are operating at consciousness level of fear, then your view of life is that life's frightening. Your view of God is that God's punitive and out there to punish you. Your emotional state is going to be anxiety, and the process is how you deal with it is withdrawing. You can look at any one of the levels of consciousness, like at the really low levels. That's when you get into, evil and misery and all that. So as you go up on the scale of consciousness, the reason why you want to is because your view of the world changes, your view of God changes, the way you feel, your emotional state changes. And like you were saying, until you actually make it to courage, which I don't have the graph for this, I'll probably paste it in there. It's something like in the early 2000s when this was made, it was 80%, it's either 80 or 85% of the entire globe operates below 200.
Yes, because insane. What I would say, like the whole purpose of what I'm trying to do in my office is help bring people, like I'm trying to help wake them up. I'm helping bring into awareness state, right? Which is a practice to get into a higher awareness, is to get into a higher conscious state to break out of these dense levels, right? And so it's a practice of being awareness, and it's shifting the viewpoint. So again, I feel like consciousness, when we're talking about it, is like the lens that we're placing, that we're viewing everything coming out from.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Your view, your subjective view. And you know, at the end of like Survivor and a lot of those TV shows, it's always like your perception is your reality, and that's true. Lowercase r reality, which is like the way you perceive and experience. So your perception is fundamentally altered by your level of consciousness. And so when you're, no matter what you're doing, you're seeing some level of distortion of reality, capital R.
Either way, right?
Yeah.
Because either to say one way is better than another is a judgment.
Right.
And so it's just a different lens point, right? So like, I mean, really, like psychedelics, why psychedelics are coming in so big right now as a spiritual healing tool, right? Is because it comes in and it shifts the conscious field right away without having to work at it so hard.
Yeah, and the thing about that, so let's talk about that, because I think an interesting thing happens with psychedelics where, let's say, one experiences a higher state, which is what it does. You often go into, you know, which I believe the value is, you wouldn't know it if you're depressed. You don't really know necessarily that you're depressed, but you take an antidepressant, you're like, oh man, like this is maybe what I could feel like. Similarly, I would say with psychedelics, you're able to experience an altered state, and for temporarily, which is a lot of people don't understand. I keep hearing like people saying they had an ego death and this crazy stuff, and it's just,
Folks, if you did,
so
you wouldn't be here.
There wouldn't be someone to say it had an ego death, for starters.
Yeah.
Anyway, again, this is why I want to just introduce the topic. Hopefully, people are going to take interest in this. But so, like psychedelics, and a really bizarre thing happens. My experience has been, because I went to that psychedelic summit we had in Salt Lake, and I heard Paul Stamets, and he was actually pretty good. But all like the preceding speakers and everyone, all the vendors and stuff, I'm going around there and looking at it more through like asking them questions like, hey, how are you guys doing to integrate the psychedelic experience? Like, what are you guys providing? Because there's people that were offering that like service, but they didn't really have any sort of like integration thing after, or any sort of guidance. And what ironically happens in psychedelics is a lot of people go in there and they have an experience where the whole world disassembles into energy. You know, they have this crazy cool mystical experience. And I feel like there's like this one of two ways you come out of there. One of them, you come out of there and you go, wow, everything is connected and I am in love with the whole universe. In fact, I am the whole universe, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's this other one where everything is disassembled. This is all just a dream. This is all just fake. So nothing really matters. And until I got into this stuff, I thought, I didn't really understand the difference. And Lion King, we talked about it a million times. Hakuna Matata and Lion King is more, it wasn't, the whole story in that one is he started out in New Age spiritualism because he ran away from his home, and his buddies are like, hey man, just don't worry about it. And that actually, if you look vibrationally on the chart, apathy is one of the lower vibrations. And so it's not actually dealing with and transcending a confrontation. It's spiritual bypass.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
And so that's one way a lot of people go. And I would say a big chunk of the psychedelic community goes into spiritual apathy and New Age, this New Age spiritualism, which is an apathetic approach, like that nothing really matters. Whereas the other side, which can also be attained with the same modalities, is like everything matters. And anyway, that's one like pragmatic way where like something like this is useful, is you can start to identify ways in your life or lives around you if something is coming from this egoic sort of animal nature, or if it truly is like a higher spiritual state.
Right. More evolved. I'm glad you bring that up because I feel like that's some of the like, there's a little bit of like uncomfortableness around this new age spirituality, right? And I feel like people don't want to talk about it because, to your point, it's almost an avoidance. Like, everything's great, just raise your vibration and it'll be fine. No, guys, when people come in and they tell me they want to get enlightenment and like work on enlightenment, I'm like, buckle your ass up, because this requires a lot of dedication, a lot of commitment, in the sense of like being consistent and practicing awareness. Because what's in order to do it is it's not everything's passing off of like, oh, don't worry about things. It's starting to take those harder energy fields, if it's apathy, and transcend them. It's not about avoiding these energy fields and that one is better than another. And I would say that too, once you start raising at higher conscious levels, like for the Christ consciousness, for example, there's not, again, it goes back to, there's not a judgment. So you don't look at this emotion as bad or good as much as how can I transmute this energy into come into more of a neutral or an abundant state, right? And so I think we have to be very, very careful. And to that point too, like even if we take the topic of psychedelics, right? Depending on your viewpoint, depending on your lens, on your conscious experience on there, you're gonna absorb the essence of it one way or another, right? And so again, it's being very cautious. It's even having this conversation to have people start coming into awareness. Where's your conscious level at? Where's your awareness right now? How are you feeling? Are you feeling engaged? Are you feeling angsty, right? Because I would tell you from my experience of going on this path, the way I view things is totally different than what I viewed them when I started on this path, right? And it's been a distilling and a concentrate and a constant what it is coming into awareness and not sleepwalking anymore, right? So that's the practicing shift, and anybody can take any of that, like even in psychedelics, like meaning you could take the negative approach or the positive, like to raise or to dense more density.
Yeah, I would even say think about like if someone went through a divorce and maybe you're waking up every day to make your ex miserable for all the things they did, leaving the toilet seat up or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're just hell bent. And I know people like that. And I think we all know people like that. And you go have an experience where you actually experience that, no, you actually love your ex and you forgive your ex, and you either accept that, and then when you come back to being a moron the next day, which everyone does, nobody has an ego death,
right?
They come back to being the
damn human again,
which I would argue, if you're not prepared to be aware that you have work to do, then it's an awful idea. Like, don't do psychedelics. It's a stupid idea.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna now know, oh, my life is shitty, and it's because I'm the one creating it. Mm-hmm. You know, so the whole ignorance is bliss is somewhat true in the sense that at least you're suffering and you can't assign it anything, and you can juice off the negativity and the victimhood, and maybe even go on social, whatever it is. But as soon as you have like an experience where it shows you the reality, then man, that's gonna suck, because now you're realizing, then you're confronted with, man, I've got to work through and transcend this stuff and truly forgive and embody forgiveness of my ex and all that. Or I'm going to just go into this apathetic, avoidant thing. And I believe that's what happens. It's like you become aware of this like block of stuff.
Yeah.
And then either you can't handle it, so you go into apathy, or then you start working through it. And once I believe you start making progress through it, like, it might take a year, it may take 10 years to actually truly embody what you experienced for a few hours one evening. But my argument would be, if you're sincerely prepared and ready for the work and when people even say the work all the time, but they're not being very clear what that is. Right. I'm saying the work would be, how about next time your ex needs something, you don't attack them with this text message? Or how about when, you know, someone's doing something to really, your ex is doing something that really pisses you off, you take the higher road. Have you told your ex, hey, after a lot of reflection, I'm realizing, yeah, you might have left the seat up a lot of times, but I did this, that, and the other.
Totally. Right.
Whatever. So that's in that way, it can be extremely useful. And in the other way, it actually could make someone worse off than they started.
Absolutely. And that's like viewpoints, right? Like, so it's an opportunity. And that's, again, what I'm trying to teach people is coming into awareness. So like a lot of the majority, when you're talking about Hawkins' chart here of like 80% not being in conscious awareness, I would say, from what I've experienced of working with people, for the majority, yes. And that's why they're in reactive states. And so coming into consciousness again, I feel, is an awareness. I have been attacking him because he keeps leaving the toilet seat up. And maybe what if I just need to take your approach to go, maybe it's just because like that doesn't bother him as much. And maybe if I like pull back a little bit and don't bring that up as the subject, it'll allow other things. But like people get so gnawed in on the thing.
Yeah.
And they don't feel justice.
Yeah.
Which again is another thing I would say of raising conscious, when we're talking about raising these conscious levels, you again start elevating into this place where you're like, oh, I'm not judging this other human. Like, I would say for me personally, I'm to a point now where like, do I get annoyed and put off by people? Hell yes, I do. I'm human.
Right.
But do I judge them for that? No. And so now I look at people and I'm like, well, they've got another story. Like the reason why they're reacting this way is because they got something going on. I'm not going to take it personally, but that's a choice. And I've only been able to come into making those choices by coming into awareness.
Right. Yeah, I would even say that if you look at the whole world, and I will probably throughout these mini series show like different things that there's a consciousness level among all of humanity. It varies by countries. It actually pools. The US is about 50-50 split between those below 200. It's actually the highest, at least this is in the early 2000s, was the highest calibrating nation. But there's nations where, and this is something I learned in Central America because I was down there, and this kid that was 16 years old was riding a crappy bike. We set an appointment with him to come back the next day. We walk away. This is in this scary city called, it was in Guatemala City, this zone called 18, but we walk away, we hear gunshots, don't think anything of it because, you know, that's, you hear them all the time down there. That city averaged like, I think it was like 35 homicides a day, something crazy. And so where we went, there was nobody there. Come back, walking past where we were, and right there in the gutter, like where we were standing, we were actually sitting learning how to play the song on the guitar, meeting this kid. There was a dead body, and we thought, holy crap, we were right there like 10 minutes ago. We could have been caught up in that. Don't think much about it because that happens down there. Just we were grateful that we weren't there when it happened. We come back the next day to go visit this 16-year-old kid, and his dad, this guy with his shirt off, which I didn't know until later, it was his dad, comes. He's got this loud music playing, and he's drunk out of his mind, and he comes running at the door where we were knocking with a machete, his shirt, and he's got his shirt off, and swings his machete at me, and I like shut his arm in the door, like right as the machete kind of like swings past my face, and we run off down the street, and I'm like, holy crap, what the hell is that all about? And I asked the neighbor, and he goes, he's mad because they killed his son. I'm like, they killed his son. I'm like, what happened? And they're like, oh, they wanted his bike and he didn't want to give it to him. So here's this kid on this crappy little bike in this third world country. These kids want his bike. He resists it. They pull out a gun and shoot him. Now I'm like 18 or whatever. And I'm thinking, holy shit, in what world is a life worth less than a bicycle? And I'm on a church like mission here. I grew up in the Mormon church, and I'm out doing this like church service, and I'm trying to make sense in my mind. How is it feasible that someone could murder someone for a bike? Mm-hmm. And that and some other experiences got me interested in even when I studied economics, the idea that people behave rationally. Well, rationale, reason, if you look on this chart, is 400. That's a very high level of operation, relatively speaking. That's about what we embody as a country. But there are other countries that their level of consciousness is not reasonable. It's operating more in this animal egoic level, and it doesn't mean that it's somebody that's better or worse. It's just divinity expressing itself at that vibration.
Yes.
But the reason why this is like the most important topic I think we talk about is, to me, is the principle of forgiveness that Jesus taught. Mm-hmm. It all hinges on one thing, and that is the forgive them, they know not what they do, or the Socrates quote that all men choose the good. And then the problem was the discernment of the true good from the false good. So why can't someone, as Socrates laid it out a little more clearly, why can't someone discern the true good from the false good? Why does someone choose evil over goodness? It's only because their view's distorted.
Exactly. And I love, well, I don't love that you had to experience that and go through that story, or anybody. But when you're talking about it, which is a great example of talking about different areas and different conscious fields, like even in the state we're living in right now, I could throw out some names of some towns and you could instantly give back a feel for it, right? Yeah. Well, that's usually a collective consciousness within that demographic. And so to your point, you have some that have not evolved into higher conscious states. So their viewpoint, their lens is at a lower vibration, and it's not that they're doing anything wrong. I mean, and that again, coming from the Christ consciousness of they do not know what they're doing, is they're literally doing the best they know with what they have. They haven't, their lens hasn't adjusted yet. They're only allowed to see so much, right? And so two, when you're talking about the conscious states, one thing that I've felt into, and I haven't necessarily fully explored or gotten the detail, we've talked about this, that there are some here on this earth plate that have such high conscious levels that they are evening out the density of the lower dense fields.
Yeah.
And I would tell you what I've experienced and witnessed is that when you start raising into these higher conscious levels, your lens, like more into the Christ consciousness, you have more of this acceptance, like going back to there's a forgiving. You don't hold this judgment to others, but you also have this other deeper understanding, or at least I have at this point, that I have a deeper understanding that if I come in and lower my conscious fields, I'm not helping elevate it. I'm just going down into the same trenches, and I'm not giving an opportunity for them to see another way either. Right. So I do feel as you start to have different lenses and viewpoints and a different understanding at these conscious fields, I would say, like I said, I cannot judge a soul. There's not one soul that I can't just love and see purely. It's their humanness, right? It's the expression of their humanness. But again, and that's why I don't judge it, because it's so based off of what their experiences was, where or have been, where they have been placed, what's their environment, have they had an opportunity be presented another opportunity, right? Like, and so in that, like, again, what you're, to your point, I feel like a lot of what this is such an important topic, because it again, if we're looking out, like if you were driving and your windshield was really dirty, it would be hard to like get and navigate around, right? It just would be hard. Yeah. It's not that the windshield's being an asshole or anything, it's just difficult. That's your viewpoint. And so if you start cleansing that windshield, right, and start raising a higher consciousness, all of a sudden it gets a little bit easier to drive. And you're able to see and you're able to maneuver in different ways. And it's important because the other thing is, here's what's really mind-blowing about this. It feels good. It just feels good, right? Yeah. I mean, like high vibrations, we're joking, but like high vibrations feel good. But it's also leveling into new conscious shifts.
Yeah, selfishly, you do it to feel good. Feel good is the indicator that you're approaching, you're moving in the right direction. When you feel bad, it's because you've actually done something against your own will, which is reverberating negatively. And the issue is, though, if you don't have a certain level of consciousness, you don't even have that benefit of being aware that you've sinned, because you're operating at such like a shark, which operates at the similar level of consciousness of like a serial killer. It just goes and kills, and it doesn't feel bad that it killed that thing, or that serial killer doesn't feel bad that they killed that person. Now, the difference between, this is important, judgment and discernment is I can love, let's say, Ted Bundy, recognize that is an expression of divinity operating at an extremely dim level, and as such, my discernment, my judgment isn't that it's not judging that he's a bad person and all that, but I can discern that is a killer, and I'm not going to put that anywhere near my family. In fact, that the most loving thing to do is to take that and isolate him, maybe even whatever the thing is. And so that's another place where which kind of distortion of the truth happens all the time. You could take like a spiritual principle, like we did, and that again, that's the principle of forgiveness. Everyone's doing what they feel is best at the time,
Right.
but you also, without abdicating on God, that's the case. You can, or advocating like lack of responsibility. You can still hold people accountable, and I think the difference between everyone's always going to be accountable, even the serial killer for what they're doing, they're still accountable to it. But the difference also is culpability happens when you actually have a high enough level of spiritual awareness that like you experientially feel those negative emotions when you've sinned or when you've done something wrong. You're then not only accountable for what you've done karmically, but you're also culpable because you've been given the light of discernment.
Right. Which is also a tricky thing, right? Like if we just get into, I'm going to kind of take this topic. Like if we get into like religion, okay, and we have our priests, pastors, whoever up there, bishops, we instantly give them all this power because we're like, oh, well, they're in this position, so they should have a higher conscious level, right?
Right.
That's not always the case. I'm just using that as an example. And so, I don't know why I just U-turned on this, but I did.
Well, we can talk. Well, so that would be okay. So that's a great segue. Well, it's important if this was actually well known and understood. If people at least accepted the fact that everything that they deal with in life is either coming from love or fear, because love is love, and they know the qualities and the byproduct of love leads to oneness, connection, these positive. A positive kinesiologic response in the body because you've just done something in harmony with your essence, in harmony with your being. Fear creating these negative emotions, which is either to tell you that what you did was a sin, or what you did was out of alignment with your will, for the purposes of correcting yourself, for helping you bring yourself into righteousness with your inner will, which we've talked about before on our other episode. But you could go to church and you could have a bishop that is supportive and loving and like, oh, hey man, yeah, we all mess up, like let me do what I can to support you. Or you could have, if one is operating at the lower level of consciousness that we were showing, that views God as punitive, which is a fear,
right, and judgmental.
Yep,
got a lot of those.
Oh, you're gonna pay for doing that. Oh,
you're going to hell.
What, with who? You teenager with raging hormones? You son of a bitch! What the? And I'm just here to say, guys, that's bullshit. And the problem is, when you operate like that, the net negative has no longevity to it. Like it has, like force has temporary power, but in the long run, it just dissipates. And I feel like one thing we are seeing right now is in the religious setting, people, if they even want to survive, even if selfishly you want to survive, you better start teaching love and forgiveness and not this bullshit punitive whatever, which also that's why I said I'd say go read A Course in Miracles or really contemplate this.
I was just gonna say the Course in Miracles says it's so great, and so you cannot be in the two fields at once, meaning you cannot be in love and hate at the same time. You can't even blend them over. So the Course in Miracles, I love it, says you can either, and another way to say that is you can either be a host to God or a hostage to the ego.
Yeah.
But you cannot be both. And so even though, and that's why I was kind of getting into why I was kind of segueing into the religion aspect, is that I think we as humans tend to give a lot of our power over to be like, oh, well, they're in a righteous position, so they must have a higher conscious field. And that's dangerous because, like you're saying, you might have somebody leading and saying, I'm coming from God. However, preaching in a very judgmental way, right? Which goes against everything that is meant for. So, but that's a very limiting view. And so I think it's very important to what I was trying to angle in there was, as us as humans, and souls to be a witness and to start paying attention, start seeing where these people's conscious levels are. Understanding like just because they have a role doesn't mean they have a higher conscious level. They could actually be, and I've experienced a lot of souls who you wouldn't think had high conscious, or they're in an area where they wouldn't have a and they have a super high conscious level, right? And so I'm just saying that to be also careful. Another thing I would say that too, like fear and love. One of the things and I think I've told you about this a couple times, what I've also noticed and witnessed, it's interesting how people relate to the world based on their viewpoint with God.
Yeah.
Which is also another conscious level. Like, so if their conscious level is limiting and fear-based, everything is an oh shit and you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the glass is half empty, and
yes.
there's a snake in the bottom of it.
Yeah, and talk about butt cheeks clenched. I hate that energy. It makes me like it's so stifling to the soul. But you could have a conscious field, right, where it's more loving awareness, where again you're engaging at a totally you could have and I'm saying there's all different types out there, and just using that as an example of just pay attention, folks. Like where is this person's conscious level coming from? And a good indicator is, how do you feel when you're around this person? Do they make you feel more abundant? Do they make you feel like life giving, like life, and it's like, oh, I feel safe around them? Or are they making you feel less than, right? Because right then too, I will tell you, anybody with higher conscious levels, especially over, what's the limit? What's the line?
200.
200. Mm-hmm. And courage is one that I use big time in the office, because I'll tell people, I'm like, courage is the last energy field to bounce you over into abundance. It's, I'm scared, but I'm going to do it anyways, right? And that is a practice of getting in those conscious fields. Like, it's what I would tell everybody. It's not something you just inherit naturally. Well, you probably do to a certain level that you're in, but you always have the capability to go either way on those conscious levels. Because some people come in, and most of us come in very pure because the world hasn't hit us up yet. And then we get dense, and depending on our environment, our viewpoint, again, the lens is shifted. But what I'm encouraging, and my belief is, no soul left behind. Every soul has the capability, if they are willing and wanting, to expand their conscious levels in their viewpoints.
I agree. The courage to face your fear, you can see why that is, in fact, the first thing, because why would you do something that's an irrational behavior?
Right.
Because the rational thing would be to avoid suffering. And so you're constantly, the animal is like, in fact, I was watching Mr. Beast, which is so good. And the finale we're going to watch like this weekend, but he's giving away $5 million as a grand prize, but on the way he keeps tempting these people with like prize money. And there was even a time where like 2 people turned down $1 million each when there was like a huge group, because they're like, if they could have taken the $1 million and just walked, but they self-sacrificed so that the whole group could advance. That kind of game happens all the way along the way. And there was a time, there's 10 people left, there's $1 million out there. And so the first lady picked the order of people she trusts, and she, being the first person, she took 100,000 for herself, because she's like, dividing into 10 equal parts, that's morally right. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's her level of consciousness. That's her. She's probably operating. She's above 200 in that way. She's obviously being, integrity. Right. Is a higher vibration. So she does that. The next guy, he's got these like tattoos on his face. He actually seems like a good guy, but he's probably done some prison time. He takes like $223,000 because like his birthday or some stupid rationale. He said that was the reason why, but he doesn't. It might not. Maybe it didn't occur to him to take 100,000, but even if it did, his level of consciousness is like, no, I can say it was my birthday, therefore I'm going to take 223. Okay, the next guy, he's like this guy that does like, I can't remember. He's the whole time. This is the guy that's been the loudest, and I love how the producers, like the episode before, he was totally berating some guy for not taking the high road because like. He tried to protect himself by picking one of this girl's friends to be by him, and they got eliminated. And this guy's like berating him for lacking integrity and shaming him. He's shaming the guy. Guess how much money that guy took? Number 3 in the line.
I'm sure the most.
All
of it.
Pretty much the rest of the money. And then the other guys are like, what the hell? And they're all pissed. They're like, who did that? And then when they finally hashed out, he's like, I did it for my family. I did it for my kids, whatever. And he's sitting here justifying in his mind. He's just sitting here. He's sitting here. And I hate that, by the way. I you see it in a business setting all the time where I shouldn't say I hate that because I love everything. Sorry. But in a business setting, someone will completely freaking screw somebody because they're like, I have kids. We all have stuff.
We
right?
all have kids.
Yeah. So people will behave, and it happens in church settings. It happens in every setting you can imagine.
Anywhere there's humans.
Everywhere you find a human, you're going to find asshole behavior because, and this is why this is important.
Yeah.
50% of our country, 80% of the world is literally operating in a way where they will completely self-serve. It doesn't even factor that, and they're because they're not even using reason. They're using emotion to say, how can I gain the most for myself right now? And that's what they're going to do a lot of times.
And they're also coming from a scarcity viewpoint. So when you're coming from that, your belief system is there's not enough for everybody. Yeah. So I need to take it. So again, if you, you are watching a show, right? So that guy's got a lower conscious field. So he's looking out as like in victimhood against scarcity, where the first lady is at a different viewpoint. She's higher up on the mountain and can see, oh, there's actually fields and fields and fields enough for all of us that we could all equally gain from this, right? And so her viewpoint's totally different. And one thing that when I'm working with people, that I'm always trying to articulate to them, because when they're coming in, they're usually complaining from the viewpoint they were at, which is a limiting viewpoint almost all the time, right? So why they're coming to me is, well, because I have abilities and I can back out and I'm at a higher viewpoint. So what I tell them is like, you have to understand, like, so instance, like, let's just say it's a couple that's been arguing. I'm like, well, you guys have both been in lower conscious states. So you can't see, you're like literally in the trenches. So if you try to like keep coming, like you have to start raising your vibration or come to somebody who has a higher viewpoint to go, actually, look, guys, there's another way.
Yeah.
And then as you start to show them another way and they accept another way and they start practicing a new way, again, coming into awareness, it's like, when you don't know something, you don't know something. But if you know, it's like, okay, well, you like, how about cigarettes in the 80s? Learning like probably shouldn't smoke, right? Like it's a new conscious state. We have a new knowledge. So there's this opportunity to keep growing. And when you do, what I just try to tell people is you're literally getting new viewpoints. Like if you're in a lower conscious state and you're down in the valley, I can't see. If I'm in a ditch and I can't see there, I'm literally limited with those viewpoints. As I raise higher, all of a sudden my perception is totally different, right? So again, that's what I'm saying is, you know, just from even the conversation we're having, what I would encourage the folks out there is play a game, play an experiment this week. Go out there and start feeling into or paying attention, start witnessing, how is this person communicating? Are they the type of person when we go out to eat, they're like, hey, let's just share with the whole table? Or are they like, I better get my own, like, because there's only limiting of, you know what I mean? You can really just start to understand where people are coming from at different conscious levels. Now, here's what's really beautiful too, because once you start raising, like I was saying earlier, in higher conscious levels, you start to realize that you have a responsibility in the whole as well. So if I am in interaction with somebody who's at a dense conscious level, like I was saying, I don't lower my level to them. I use that vibration to show them that there's another opportunity and coming from a loving awareness, right? And not a judgmental or a separating state. And that is that line. So again, I would tell everybody out there, play that experiment. Are you coming from a less than state or are you coming from a state of abundance? Where's your viewpoint at? Yeah. Am I just surviving? Am I like, oh, poor me? Like, and this is what I'll tell you, this is something real simple that I see with the people I've been working with, in the sense of when they're shifting and they're evolving. Certain things of just as simple as going to the grocery store, not finding a parking spot, and somebody takes their parking spot and then they go in and somebody doesn't hold the door for them. And then so they go to check out and the lady closes their line right before they get up. their viewpoint a lot of times is, oh, the world is out to get me, right? Because it's a very limiting view. They will start out, I'm just using this as a broad example, but they will start out in that viewpoint. And the more and more they're doing the work and coming into awareness and shifting, a lot of times those same people that will come in and say that, they'll start laughing. They're like, oh my God, I used to think all of that revolved around me.
Yeah.
Like I thought the world really was out to get me, where I'm just starting to realize like, maybe that's not the case. And maybe when I do come from that viewpoint that the world's out to get me, it starts mirroring that back over and over, which is a whole nother thing, because like attracts like energy, right?
Right.
So part of what I try selling people on themselves is getting into these higher conscious selves, because I'm like, guess what, guys? Guess what the selling point is? You feel better. You feel better, but you also go into the world and you are giving opportunities of others that can see from a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
Which is liberation.
Yeah.
Which is my whole point here on this earth plane. Like
Yeah.
is to help bring that out of the suffering and realize that there is another viewpoint.
So another topic, well, I mean, related to that is the idea that anything, and it's another Course in Miracles teaching, says the only thing that could ever be lacking in a situation is something you haven't given away. So if you don't have any friends, when was the last time you were being friendly?
Right.
This person that the door didn't open at the grocery store and they're pissed about it. Well, when's the last time you opened the door from someone else?
Amen.
So anything you don't have in your life, just rest assured, like go start giving it away. And you can't give something you don't have. So the deepest principle of this is if you want forgiveness for being an idiot, which we all have been.
If you're human, you have been. Human,
you've got nonstop. Then like you take advantage of the opportunity to forgive somebody. So this guy who takes this deal, he's telling all his friends, they're like, hey, we're family. We're never going to betray each other. He betrays them. He's going to be feeling the negative emotion and stuff. Now, if that catalyzes change and he starts taking ownership and he starts like evolving from it, that can turn into a blessing. If not, and he retains it and then just starts spiraling lower, the byproduct that's why there's such thing as negative karma. That's why the world is this sandbox where you have different levels of consciousness. It's not like it's because we're all working out our karma at different vibrations. No one's better. No one's worse. It's just divinity expressing itself at that vibration. That war over there is the sandbox by which these people are going to resolve the wars. Typically happen when someone breaks integrity. Like when Hitler signs a treaty saying he's not going to invade Poland, and then he lies and goes and invades them. Then like, okay. And then that's why you go into war. So there has to be, as awful as the world might seem, it's really just a perfect expression of what it is, so that everyone that's here can experience their individual curation of the human experience that's going to evolve their soul.
Amen. That was very, very, very well articulated. And it's conscious levels. It's when you were just saying that, it was reminding me of when I had my mystical experience and I wasn't seeking, I had no idea, but it was a moment. I couldn't tell you how long it lasted. I went outside to go meditate at the tree. I like literally turned around and I can't even tell you, like all I could see was light. Like even my physical vision went out, but it was all of a sudden I could experience almost from like the feeling of God's interpretation was like, and it was like all is well, but what I could see was like war, and I could see like children needing all these things that were like the way that if I viewed from here, I was like, oh, this is horrible. But viewing it from that viewpoint was like, oh my God, all is well and it is all working itself out. Everything is an opportunity to come into wholeness. And I say that all the time, but it genuinely is.
Yeah, you say the word wholeness, sin being separation from the whole. All sin is coming from, or all suffering also comes from separation. So if you truly want to change the world or help the world, you let go of, there's two pathways, the mind and the heart. The mind is being somewhat analytical. You can kind of identify these egoic things, start using the mind to transcend them, kind of like the A Course in Miracles, the Buddhist approach. And then the pathway of the heart, like when you feel these negative emotions, you learn from them, let
Right.
them go, and then you change your way of being. You set your intention, because you can't actually even evolve from where you are unless you draw on divine will. So that's the basic. You got to turn to God and say, I
Yes.
want to be able to see the world as a more loving place. I want to let go of these negative perceptions I have of the world. And then I
Yeah.
believe, my personal opinion, grab the best that you can from all those sources. Like there's some really good stuff this way where I can have a better mental state and be a glass half full type of person.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a, instead of drinking alcohol every night to try to numb out my existence, I can do a walk in nature and allow myself to like process these emotions of like, you know, that I'm feeling as a byproduct of the decisions I've made the last 6 months or whatever it is.
Absolutely. Like it's and once you start getting in those states too, anytime you once the vibration starts shifting into higher vibrations and a conscious high rising, any of those dense negative, anything that separates out of the wholeness energy field, you don't want to be a part of. It doesn't resonate in the vibration.
Right.
And so it just wants to push it out. And coming into that, it's just those of like when like you were just saying the wholeness state. When I keep talking about wholeness, really it's metaphorically and physically speaking, meaning you can feel when you're not missing anything. It is a feeling of um I always say it's like a very like for me, I always want to put my hands up like Christ
Complete.
and like levitate, because it's this very powerful feeling that I sense inside, but it's not, there's no force going out to it. It just is. It's like life itself. And it's this respect almost, or this reverence of understanding that everybody is vibrating again at the level that they need to be vibrating at. However, there's always room for growth.
Yeah. And loving thing to do, again, like I was saying earlier, it's an important point because people, there's nothing integrous about allowing something that's non-integrous into your field, whether that's like a friend that's really awful, whether that's the solution. I don't want to even get political about it, but you got to respect, you got to recognize that like you maintain a place of integrity the best you possibly can, and that is what is spiritually responsible.
Yes.
It is not responsible
Yes.
to inundate yourself. Like I can love a rattlesnake, but I'm not going to have it like sleep in my bed like my dog Margaret does, because that snake's going to bite me.
Right.
That's called discernment.
Discernment.
I'm not judging the snake and saying, "Oh, you're the
Right.
worst thing, and we should just kill all the rattlesnakes." I'm just saying, "Hey, this is cool, but like you stay over
Right.
there, and I'm going to be over here."
Which is also huge, which what I try to encourage everybody is it's an inside job. And what I mean by that is stop going outside and trying to control what other people are doing. Like, so if Joe's acting like an asshole over there, usually people's approach is like they'll sit and they'll take all of their energy and they give the power, they're actually giving their power to Joe, and they'll sit and be like, I can't believe he did that. Could you believe that? I can't believe he cut over on my lawn. Whatever the stupid thing is, right? Where the reality is, if you start to work on you, whatever Joe's doing doesn't affect you, but you also have the discernment to be like, hey, Joe, don't ride your mower on my like lawn, like you don't take it like so personal, but meaning there's a shift, because like if you go in and you're blaming Joe and you go over there and you're like, Joe, blah 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 blah, Joe's gonna respond the same way back, right?
Yeah. One thing I forgot to mention, and again, this isn't meant to be a complete dissertation on consciousness at all. And I again, if I could just encourage anyone to just go read about it, there's a lot of great books. Love A Course in Miracles, and if you get into the Hawkins stuff, the one thing I want to say about this scale is this is a logarithmic scale, which means the difference between 1 and 2 is times 10, and the difference between 2 and 3 is 10 times higher than that. So if you literally go from your life, let's say you hit level, you're at level 200, right? They're a tipping point of spirituality, and you get to 201, that is 10 times more energy than what's at 200. So think about the exponential power of logarithmically scaling.
Oh, it's huge.
That's why 80% of the world can be below 200, because the vibration of literally a handful of people and the ones at the higher state counterbalances all of the negativity of the entire freaking world. If not, the world would destroy itself. It literally has to have this spiritual balance.
Yeah.
Or it's the animal nature, because the animal nature is a net negative.
Yes.
The world would just implode on itself in warfare and killing, and then like there would be only death. So God bless our avatars and our people that are spiritually seeking. And it's so much so that in his books he talks about, in your neighborhood, if you the embodiment of, I think it was unconditional love or whatever, it permeates your entire neighborhood. It's not that you're saying anything, but just you being loving.
It's just making me laugh. So I have this lady in the neighborhood who won't wave to me. Okay. It really bothers me. Like I go out of my way to be nice and all these things, and it bothered me. Well, what I realized was like, that's a judgment that she's not waving back. So at first when I was like, it was like very forceful. I was like, I'm going to get this lady to wave back to me. Okay. I just want to smile. That's all I'm asking for. What was funny was I had this moment driving home. This is probably like right after I moved in, and I was going through a lot. So, but anyways, all of a sudden I had this moment where the lady, she walks by my house 3 times a day. Like 3 times a day, this lady won't. And I'm like, always like, hi. Anyways, I had this realization that I was like, I have a judgment towards this lady. Like, who is it my place to say that she needs to smile back to me, right? Like, I'm actually making it worse by putting this force on there. Because really what I'm doing is smiling, but I'm like, just wave to me, right? And so all of a sudden I like kind of laughed at
conditional love, maybe.
It is, right? But then I started laughing at myself because I was like, this is such a control thing. Like, you're sitting here thinking you're enlightened. Hello, here's a human moment. Yeah. And what I've started doing now, and from that moment on, was I was like, if she doesn't want to judge, that's like, if she doesn't want to wave, that's fine. But I'm just going to keep loving her. I'm not going to change the way that I interact and I want to engage. And I'm just going to smile at her. Now, the difference of my smile, she did, because then she started smiling back. Meaning I get to a place where I wasn't in a judgment space. It was just like, I see you. And now she gives me half smiles. Nice. Not a full smile, but it's a half smile. Because but again, it's coming in the space of like, even how funny, there's never even a conversation. But I guess what I'm also saying, when I had a moment of consciousness, I was like, don't play into the separateness. Part of having an awareness is to raise the environment. So I really I'm not doing it to get something back. Right. And that's a shift. Love. That's unconditional love. It was a shift. And even though how silly that is, right? How silly is that? I want her to smile back at me. Yeah. It's total control thing. Then I went into total judgment about how rude this lady was. Then I went into whole story. I don't even know this lady, but I went into her childhood of, did her mother teach her manners and this and that, which again is a judgment, which was funny because for me, it was again an awareness of like that this isn't ultimately what you're seeking. Like, if she smiles back or not, again, that's not the point. The point is to bring the vibration up in a loving space and to let her do whatever she wants.
Yeah, reverence their sovereignty and their ability to fumble through life and suffer as long as they want to. It almost paradoxically seems like there's a resistance when you try to compel, like you're compelling the smile back. She's not going to feel good about it if the energy of it is like, oh, she's being, like, there's a lot of certainly self-righteous behavior that happens in a setting where we're really just being Pharisees at that point, but we're not. Yes. The essence of what we're doing isn't actually love. So the world, starting to consume the world through this lens, this is why this is the most important topic you could possibly. Yes. I like the yin yang, the way that kind of tries to harness our kind of subjective reality, our contextual reality, but this the levels of consciousness is incredible, and to the high vibration thing, I believe that when people were just even in proximity to Jesus, not even him saying a word, just being in that field. And I know that's true because even what's the story when someone touched his robe or something, they were healed.
The woman, yeah.
There's those kind of stories. And a lot of these higher state people would go to see these advanced people, and they would just be healed. and they don't even know why they were there in the first place.
Yeah, it's so huge because it's the vibration itself. It actually, like what I was saying, like, so again, these conscious fields that you get in, you don't need verbal language. Like trees aren't verbally communicating, but they're in a conscious state, right? Like they're able to get into these essence of these fields. And yeah, there is literally a place where you can start elevating your energy field into so much that yes, Jesus was able to heal in that higher vibration without even having to physically do anything, just getting in his field. So think about this. We know people. I'm going to give a shout out to my friend Pat Mitchell at church right now because she's a fireball. I always say when she gets in town, I got to put my glasses on because she just expresses just loving awareness all the time. Like she is just exuding it out of her. So even if you don't want to participate in it, it's just like going into the field. Now, part of that's because I have ability, so I can see it. So it's very entertaining. But what a beautiful thing. Like she's not going out with an agenda to say, I'm going to do this for these people. She's just being it, which shifts the energy field around her. No different than if we had Debbie Downer show up, right? Which like all of a sudden it's like, wah, 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 right? Because it's a dense field. It's always in victimhood. So, excuse me, these states of consciousness are huge. You don't necessarily need to go do anything. Just being in them is contributing to the whole.
That's right. And keeping holy company, meaning surround yourself with people that are lifting you up.
I like that. That's a good one.
Yeah, and you'll have the feeling good around people. If you do not feel good around somebody, don't even wait for your mind to learn why it is. This is like, I've seen this 1,000 times, and people don't have a good feeling about something, but then they wait around to find out.
And then they're like, I knew at the beginning.
I knew this from the very beginning. I'm like, okay, but I've been there. Like, so the mind tends to try to, that's the thinking and doing, the whole being exercise, which you've been working on me with at nauseum, and you're getting through my thick skull, which I appreciate.
Yes.
And is more of an intuitive way of navigating life through a spiritual awareness instead of like a logical, as great as logic is, which it's way better and way more advanced than like the lower states. What humanity is trying to burst into now, my feeling, is a more spiritual being. So we are having an evolution of consciousness. And as we evolve, the crazy thing is things like poverty and things that are a byproduct of lower states of consciousness will start dissolving.
Yes.
We will become more spiritual beings than these temporal beings. And we'll rabbit hole on like all these topics in different books that talk about it. Law of One's a cool one that's talking about densities and all that kind of stuff. But I'm glad that we just at least brought this up as a framework, just to anyone that likes to listen to our show, all 10 of you or however many there end up being. We're just getting started with these, and hopefully you find it helpful. And these are just kind of introductory things of stuff that we've been studying at for like 10 years, but hopefully we're just giving you like enough of it that as you go into kind of discovering it, all the time going forward. So
it's a great visual.
Yeah.
I would say too, in the beginning of my like right when I had met you too, I was able to sense different energetic feel. Everything has a vibration to it, right? So this was like, I was already starting to put together like, okay, this, like apathy, depression, obvious shame, the lowest vibration, joy. And then you come along and you're like, hey, have you heard of Hawkins? And I was like, no, I sure haven't. And then you gave me that book, and I remember being like blown away, or letting it go, where it had the charts of just even emotion in there.
Oh yeah.
So I would just say it's a great reference point, and it's a great visual to help digest some of these unseen energy fields that are out there. But again, also what I would tell you, what I'm trying to advocate for, is everybody trusting themselves. You have everything within you. You don't have to actually ask somebody else how you're feeling. Just check in with yourself, and you can see, like, if you're coming into having a hard day and you're in a Debbie Downer kind of conscious state, like everything's going to be in victimhood. If you're in a more Christ-like consciousness, ooh, it's so much nicer up there. It's just like
Yeah, I love it, Shannon.
I love it. I love talking about this stuff. Again, I think it's important. Like, I don't think you and I are claiming to be experts on this, but I do feel it. We have immersed our lives in a lot of this, and the questioning and the experiment, like just playing with it and evolving with it in itself. And it's a fun place.
Yeah, because once we've gotten through some of these core baseline axioms, like these fundamental ways of digesting spirituality, this is one of the cool, right, major tools. And then there's like fundamental axioms, like the key to forgiveness we talked about today is realizing that everybody is doing perceptively what they perceive to be best at the time.
Oh.
And we'll go more into that like on a more, so that's like a huge axiom. That's the key to forgiveness of everything that's occurred in your life. That's massive for all of your clients and anyone listening. And then like the other axiom of there are no accidents. So we get through these like axioms and some of these ways to talk about spirituality, talk about, you know, levels of consciousness, yin yang, and then all that kind of stuff. Then I believe we can even talk about things that are actually going on in the world. We can start applying these principles and then these tools to digest what's in front of us, like what's going on, and if that thing's coming from a higher vibration or a low vibration. Now the mind can do that. You as a we're going to start taking advantage of your medium. Well, we already are in these conversations, but maybe in a more obvious way we can get energetic reads on stuff. So
definitely. And like if that's something like people have like please, by all means, if you have questions that like are happening in your life right now that you want us to apply this to, or just in general, whatever, please, by all means, like ask. We're happy to dive into it. The way I look at all of this is like an experiment. It's a fun one. We're just like playing and trying to get like deeper understanding, and it's just fun. It's just like having an awareness and like being able to operate this vehicle a lot easier than it was before for myself and what I've witnessed for others.
Yeah. Awesome. Great episode. I'm glad we hit it.
I know. That was a good float.
Yeah, good floating. Thanks for floating with us. Share with your friends if you want to, or if you don't, whatever.
It's fine.
It's fine. Put the questions. We'll have like an email, I think, on our profile, or, you know, comment below, like maybe, or you can send us like a private message, and we'll on maybe, you know, subsequent episodes bring up whatever you've got going on in your life, and we can kind of help digest it for you through some of these instruments if you find that helpful.
Perfect. I love it. Thank you for joining us.
All right, guys. God bless.
Thank you.